Now I'm glad to invite to present Heidi Boisvert. She's joining us online today. She wanted to be in person, but she had health problems. But she's been joining us the whole day, and we're very glad that you're here. So Heidi is going to be presenting embodied intelligence in the future of the performance. Heidi is an interdisciplinary artist, experienced designer, creative technologist, and academic researcher who interrogates the neurobiological and social cultural effects of media and technology. Simply put, she studies the role of the body, the senses, and the emotions in human perceptions and social change. Boisvert is currently mapping the world's first media genome while taking great care of its far-reaching ethical implications. She founded Future Perfect Lab, a creative agency and think tank that works with social justice organizations to design playful, emerging media campaigns to transform the public imagination. She also co-founded XTH, a company creating novel modes of expression through biotechnology and the human body. Presently, she is working with David Byrne on Theater of the Mind, a new immersive theater piece. Heidi is an assistant professor of AI and the arts at the University of Florida. She is also a senior research fellow at the Norman Lear Center, a research affiliate of the Open Documentary Lab at MIT, and a member of New and IC's Creative Science track. Welcome, Heidi.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yes?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it seems crazy to give a talk about embodied intelligence in this disembodied form. But I tested positive for COVID after I came back from New York. So I just didn't want to affect everybody there, even though I am in Florida. So I'm going to just share my screen. And I don't know how many people are left in the room. It's been like a long 2 days full of very dense conversation and talk. So hopefully we have a little bit more bandwidth in the end. I'm also going to probably skip because Carla did a very generous introduction to my work. So I can probably skip the first couple of slides, in terms of introducing myself. And you talked a little bit about Future Perfect Lab. So I'm going to just start here. And just, let me just see here. I guess I'll start here. So I guess for the past 15 years, I guess I'll just say most of my work has been dedicated to transforming toxic narratives through playful and imaginative experiences. And the focus has really been on building a more just and pluralist society, one in which everybody not only belongs, but thrives. So I predominantly work in collaboration with a lot of social justice organizations, but I also work as an independent artist. But much of my work, I'm part of this kind of like nationwide network of artists and media makers, social justice organizations, researchers, writers, showrunners, and a whole bunch of folks that are looking at using culture as a way of creating profound shifts in how people think and feel and behave in the world. So we believe that specific pop culture stories, so a lot of the work I'm going to share is around pop culture, and they shape narrative archetypes by carrying mental models into mass culture and gradually incite different experiences that compel new behavioral instincts. So in my practice, I do a couple of things. I catalyze this spark that I was talking about by engineering social justice messages for mass appeal through this kind of like multi-pronged feedback loop consisting of playful and imaginative creative experiences, empirical media effects research, and then both of these are supported by co-creation workshops and open source tool building, much of which lately has focused on using machine learning and Python and a whole bunch of things. So today, mostly, I was interested in talking about like my creative practice, the creative side, which is pivoted more towards performance. And then if we have a little bit of time, I'd also like to talk about the kind of biometric research I've been doing because I'm trying to expand it into the performative aspects. So if we have time, I'll share a bit of that. And that particular research, in case I don't get to it and you're interested in, over the past 4 years, I've built something called the Limbic Lab, and I conduct media effects in audience research using survey and story decoding instruments, but also biometric and linguistic analysis. And it basically, I use it to inform narrative design, story creation, distribution, audience engagement plans. But today I'm going to talk about the creative side, in which I co-create these inventive multimedia experiences in partnership with social justice organizations and media influencers through different types of touch points. Oftentimes it uses games, VR, AR, transmedia storytelling, interactive web, locative media, theater and dance. But today I'm going to mostly talk about the work that I do using dance and theater that involves different generative media and machine learning. So in the past, the work that I was making, just to give you some context for me and like who I am and where I'm coming at the work from, the angle I'm coming at, some of the work, it could take the form of like an alternate reality game in the past. So when I was mentioning, like for the past 15 years, I was working with social justice organizations, mostly around, here, this is about human rights, and it would feature different celebrities like Victor Garber, where like a player is an agent on the Council for American Heritage, and it had all sorts of plots and things. It could also take the form of an animation, just to give you a context of like, what is culture change? To raise awareness about unfair immigration laws by teledeporting Spock. And these things would play before like feature films. And we also made location-based augmented reality apps and to change perceptions around homelessness while simultaneously putting people into actual homes by raising funds. A lot of this was kind of like mathematically, computationally generated so that, the experience would map to any city all over the states. So people could understand the local impacts that homelessness was happening. So I guess what I wanted to do is just kind of like situate the context out of which my work comes. So after making this work for many, many years, I basically kind of had a crisis of faith about the work I was doing, whether it was effectual or maybe more importantly, were the tools, the like actual emerging media tools I was using to positively influence hearts and minds, and to cultivate empathetic engagement. I was wondering whether or not they were actually harmful. So while we're not yet synthetic full body prosthesis, augmented cybernetic humans tethered to cables like Major here from Ghost in a Shell, I believed our dependence upon intelligent technology was a slow form of violence, rescripting our nervous systems and quietly taking over our cognitive and affective faculties, and literally changing the structure of our brain. So I was deeply concerned that as human beings, we're becoming APIs, essentially programmable dolls, right, run on scripts and protocols, and I felt somehow responsible. So to tackle this, I ended up going back to do a PhD to conduct, empirical research into the effects of media and technology. And I discovered that our current technologies, namely the internet, mobile devices, and now immersive displays and wearables, were eroding particular areas in the brain, the amygdala and the hippocampus, which were responsible for memory consolidation. And memory consolidation is a core function in the brain, which allows us to form knowledge schemas to essentially make meaning in the world. And it also activates and regulates our emotion feeling cycles. So the shrinking gray area of our brain essentially was being reduced. And this is causing our capacity for empathy, which is what I was trying to do in my previous work, to also decrease. And then some of the findings of the research were also, I saw like an increase in fight and flight response, this kind of techno stress that's surfacing, and trying to basically coordinate or sort of like connect the dots between like our endocrinologic system, the rise and kind of like what I would call social emotional competence, especially in young people today when we're dealing with like depression, all these things. So I think what I'm trying to suggest is I was doing this work for many, many years, and I believed in the work, but then I was having sort of like a crisis of faith about that. And so my work began to pivot, and I wondered, like, how did we actually get to this point? and what were the kind of critical inflection points. And more importantly, I was curious, like, where are we actually going as a society? So I needed to understand so I could kind of like intervene and change the trajectory of technology. As a creative technologist, what is the role I can play? So I began to map the macro historical patterns by correlating Schumpeter's waves of technological innovation against corresponding media types and Neil Postman's knowledge monopolies, discourses that supported the various media's diffusion. And I discovered that the emergence of cybernetics post-World War II revealed itself as a distinct teleological forking moment where we began to move from external colonization towards internal colonization. So moving people across space to kind of taking over our perceptual reality. I then noted that at each cybernetic wave, it aligned with theoretical shifts in cognitive neuroscience. And I also added a sixth wave, the biological phase, which Czech economist Daniel Smahula predicts will peak around 2035. He believes we'll not only become more dependent upon biotechnology, robotics, biomimicry, nanotechnology, and transhuman enhancement in the years to come. So digging a little further into the history, I discovered that the aftermath of World War II witnessed the outgrowth of numerous institutions of social control in the United States. Shame associated with the vulnerability of the body at the hands of mass annihilation and the unpredictability of emotions that gave rise to fascism fueled a need to create communication strategies and computational systems to manage human and social behavior. So I'm not sure how many people in the audience are familiar. It's hard for me to read if there's eyes glazing over, but cybernetics emerged as a result of a series of convenings called the Macy Conference, which brought together an interdisciplinary group of primarily white men and Margaret Mead for the sole purpose of formulating central concepts for a theory on communication and control, applying equally to humans, animals, and machines. But the unspoken intention was to radically transform the public's perception of human beings into information processing entities, essentially intelligent machines. So the sustaining power of cybernetics, which is what I'm interested in, is this kind of like legacy and the tools that we use. Even today, as Catherine Hales has noted, was due to the strategic coordination of a theory of information, Claude Shannon's bailiwick, a model of neural functioning that showed how neurons worked as information processing systems, Warren McCulloch's life work, computers that could process binary code and that could conceivably reproduce themselves, thus reinforcing biological systems. And this was John von Neumann's specialty. And then the last piece, which was most important when we're talking about the rhetoric that we also see today around AI, is a visionary who could articulate the larger implications of the cybernetic paradigm and make clear of its cosmic significance. And this was Norbert Wiener's contribution. But it wasn't just cybernetics. What I started to observe, trying to tease out the patterns, was that there are three interrelated social forces that coalesced to accomplish this. The emergence of cybernetics was one from 1946 to 53, but this was joined with the publication of the first diagnostic statistic manual, or the DSM, in 1952, and modernism's influence on advertising during its nascent years. Each possessed its own valence of control. Taken together, they contributed to redefining the experience of subjectivity, cybernetics through the erasure of the body, behavioral psychology by regulating our emotions, and Madison Avenue by canalizing the senses. The eye was believed to be a direct pathway to the brain. As a result, we slowly migrated from presence, mutation, and randomness to absence, hyperreal, and the pattern. Information had lost its body, its materiality. I'm sure many of you have read the book by Catherine Hales called How We Became Posthuman. But in the book, she examines how and why the body became systematically erased in the construction of cyberspace in the posthuman. And she argues that it was like a deliberate erasure of embodiment, and it was performed so that intelligence becomes a property of formal manipulation of symbols rather than the enaction of human life world. Furthermore, she asserts that leaving behind the materiality of the body, typically coded feminine, enabled the predominantly white male techno-scientific community to identify subjectivity with the rational mind, traditionally coded male, a new body, not born of woman, that they imagine will be more suited to rational thought processes and immortal yearnings. So I see this as kind of like an unspoken liberal humanist impulse, which is sought to radically transform the public's perception of human beings into information processing entities, essentially intelligent machines, through the fabrication of a pattern of recursive innovation to invoke a diacritic marker of technological determinism. So the cyborg, was consciously constructed, I guess is what I'm arguing, as a technological cultural icon through science fiction, literature, film, film to support this notion to reshape representations of the body. The ethical concerns around intelligent technology is certainly not new. The fear of machine, overlords taking over the world has been present in stories since, Irwan in 1872, which, is nowhere in the other direction. The novel is one of the first to explore ideas of artificial intelligence. It was influenced by Darwin's Origins of the Species, On the Origin of Species, which had come out in 1859, and the machines developed out of the Industrial Revolution. Specifically, the chapters entitled The Book of Machines explores the potentially dangerous ideas of machine consciousness and self-replicating machines based on natural selection. The use of the satirical utopia as a narrative device enabled the argument to go between the usual polemic between vitalism and mechanism. So many, Hales again illustrates that the subterranean anxieties about the integrity and diminishing agency of the subject under the cybernetic paradigm, what author Croker coined the flesh-eating 90s, which is going to be relevant when I share some of my work. So I'm just kind of setting up the context here. We're communicated through popular speculative fiction. She juxtaposes Limbo from 1950, Do Androids Dream of Electronic Sheep, 68, and Snowcrest, 92, against the contemporaneous stages of cybernetics to suspend the complex interplay of three competing, contingent, and embodied negotiations that lead to the active and historically situated discursive construction of bodily obsolescence during the evolution of techno-scientific development. So I guess what I'm trying to establish here is, my own observations kind of coincided with some emergence in popular forms, and popular culture is a medium that I use in my own practice. So I'm sure you've, heard some of the phrases folks have read, Gibson's Neuromancer, where he, we witness a fictional representation of this bodiless exaltation of cyberspace, where the biologic body is experienced as a mere accident and inconvenience rather than as the inevitability of human life. Case, a computer cowboy, regards his body as a meat machine to lug around his brain, the seat of consciousness, and pines for an imminent return to cyberspace where you can throw yourself in a high-speed drift and skid, totally engaged but set apart from it all. And all around you, the dance of biz and all information interacting, data made flesh, in the mazes of the black market. So data here is a nod to the genetic code, now assumes the role of original source, begetting the biological processes. So the repeated motif, and I'm going to be concluding the context setting soon, the repeated motif of machines reconfiguring biological bodies into pure information, coupled with the privileging of cognition in the production of consciousness, held sway outside the realm of speculative fiction and film in the 90s. Kevin Kelly's Out of Control, for instance, The New Biology of Machines, Lee Silver's remaking Eden, Cloning and Beyond in the Brave New World, and the costly research antics of Kevin I Am a Cyborg Warwick attest to the pervasiveness and diversity of cyber culture penetrating the everyday. But by far the strongest influence on our current cybernetic resurgence was Marvin Minsky. At the fifth conference on artificial intelligence in 1996, he persuasively argues that data from the mind is the most important part of the human. The person is not a head and arms and legs. That is trivial. Person is a very large multiprocessor with a million times a million small parts, and these are arranged as 1,000 computers. The most important thing about each person is data, and the programs and the data that are the brain. And someday you'll be able to take all the data and put it on a little disk and store it for 1,000 years and then turn it on again, and you'll be alive in the 4th or 5th millennium. So as an artist and a creative technologist, and many of the people in the room, I hope, would concur, I believe that we have a responsibility to not only reflect upon how present technology shapes our cultural values and social behavior, but also to anticipate and actively contribute to a counter discourse in design practice that challenges and transforms the trajectory of future technology. One way I believe we can do this is, as Carolyn Jones urges, by taking up the technology in the service of aesthetics. In doing so, we can create a shadow discourse through our practice, our art practice. So we have a million case studies of artistic interventions that challenge the prevailing cybernetic paradigm from the 1950s to the present to learn from. In some instances, the works functioned as experiences to think with, extending Jacques Derrida's phrase, objects to think with, while in other instances, technological experimentation led to the repurposing of instrumental applications, which catalyzed innovation, only to later to be co-opted by the mainstream. Here, counterculture serves as both a critique and a bridge, allowing a crossover into newer ways of innovation. So, for instance, I just want to give you kind of like a rough overview of some of these time periods. So, like, for instance, in the 1950s, I believe this was characterized by feedback loops, information as signal noise, circular causality, instrumental language, and quantification. The interplay between cybernetics and art can be understood in the context of both modernism and ongoing aesthetic experiments with duration, movement, and process. In the 1960s and 70s, obsessions by artists focused upon reflexive language, autopoiesis, structural coupling, and system environment interaction. By the 60s, cybernetics had been absorbed into the popular imagination, and Schoeffer here, Nicholas Schoeffer, work facilitated its entrance into artistic circles. And Gray and Pask, also a wonderful, I don't have time to get into it, but cybernetics in the UK was had a very different history and kind of thematic focus. So Gray and Pask, for instance, worked with kind of open-ended, halozoistic explorations into the spiritually charged wonder of performativity and agency of matter, and was soon influenced. The field was also influenced by biofeedback music as artists began to appropriate medical equipment to manipulate biosignals for the creation of sound. The increasing availability of domestic prosumer computer-based technologies catalyzed an influx of creative research and practice in interactive and immersive arts in the 1990s. Over the initial decade, artists played a vital role in analyzing, envisioning, and developing experimental interfaces and new modalities of engagement. More importantly, many artists directly challenged cybernetics by bringing the application of technologies framed as abstract manipulation of information to embodied material, situated culture practices, which connects, I think, very well with some of the work Tina was sharing and that I'll share in a bit. In the early 2000s to the present, the machinic became increasingly informed by the organic. As Carolyn Jones contends in the same book, Sensorium, when the autonomous nervous system with its alternating dynamics of sympathetic and parasympathetic response, can be put in touch with a subcutaneous machine, we may finally feel in control of our biomimetics. And I would argue of our unpredictable selves and others, since the nervous system, which is our internal architecture, forms our perceptual reality, is at this level within the subsensorial that our contemporary artistic interventions must now occur. A biomimetic, better yet, a molecular turn. As artists, we too can design experiences to mirror complex natural systems, the internal milieu, to render visible the impacts of such co-optation and to return our autonomy to the autonomic system. This is my valence. So like artists before me, I use what I call applied media theory, a method that engages in formal experimentation with media to generate critical discourses and technologies. I employ various emerging technologies subversively to instead reify, similar to Tina, I'd say, the centrality of the body, affect, and our senses, to reject social control, quantification, and prediction by embracing human error, unpredictability, and subjectivity. To do this, in my own practice, I first turned to create almost like an antidote, let's just say, or a reversal of cybernetics. I first turned to large-scale network performance as this antidote to what I was seeing, to like the intelligent technology that I perceived as, and as Marshall McLuhan referred to as, our numb biological self, and to restore, as some of the earlier works I shared above, the autonomy to the autonomic nervous system. I started to bring people into physical spaces to explore the role the body can play in social change processes by employing dance as a 3D experimental sandbox. I have some videos I'm going to like play. Some of them have very interesting sound too, but it'll allow me to kind of talk over and through some of the processes. So you won't hear the sound on this, but I'll explain it. Radical Signs of Life was the first large-scale interactive multimedia performance I made through responsive dance, radical attempts to externalize the mind's non-hierarchical distribution of thought. Music is generated from the dancer's muscles and blood flow via biophysical sensors that capture sound waves from the performers' bodies. The data triggered complex neural patterns based on biological algorithms to be projected onto multiple screens as 3D imagery. As the audience interacts with the imagery, there are multiple connects above the audience. They enter into a dialogue with the dancers. Conceptually, the piece was an embodied examination of self-organizing systems and the increasing disparity between the encroachment of biodata and the quiet discord of biomemory. The work revealed the dangerous legacy of cybernetics and awakened an urgent need for inserting the body and affect into technology before technology further embeds itself inside of us. My collaborator, Marco Donnarumma, and I created these wireless sensors called the X-Sense as a prototype for the piece, using custom wireless transmitters and Arduinos. And they read your autonomic and somatic nervous system. Each dancer essentially wore 2 sensors on different parts of the body to explore different sonic texture. The data was then sent to Pure Data, where the signal was, we had a custom interface that amplifies and filters and then extracts various features from the data, and then you can map those features that are extracted to musical and visual parameters, whether it's in, Isadora or Touch Designer, whatever you want to use it for. Next, the data was sent, in our case, over Open Sound Protocol, OSC, to 2 systems, one to generate the visuals and processing, and the second, the music, to Max MSP, to create a real-time, immersive, spatialized composition, both sonically and then also the generative visuals that I already mentioned that were based on biological algorithms. And they are basically like spawned from the dancers' movement patterns. So the choreography was based on game rules with distinct trajectories. Dancers were responding cues from one another and the environment. Each level explored different complex algorithmic systems. The first level was Conway's Game of Life, the second Hebb's Law, and the third Markov's stochastic patterning. The audience could also co-create the work by interacting with these kind of 4 Microsoft Kinects above the pools of water where you saw the reflections, using their own movements to kind of control these AI creatures. And then the other thing I guess you saw on the back wall here, which I didn't realize the video would end, there's these kind of matrical forms in the back. And the performers, essentially, their collective muscle memory, let's just say, their energy contractions cause engrams to trigger on the back wall inside the bodies on these matrical figures. Inside the connective tissue of the bodies, I added another layer of imagery. There were videos that were triggered from the sound thresholds. So yeah, so that's that piece. Next, I wanted to apply what I learned from Radical and the body back to the work in social justice and pop culture space. So I collaborated on Beware the Dandelions with Complex Movements, a collective from Detroit. The goal of the immersive theater project was to teach social movement building, social justice movement building through complex science. Through a sci-fi parable, the work integrates a data-driven narrative with game-based collaborative problem solving communicated through live hip-hop and DJ performances. So again, sorry, you're not going to hear the music. The participant players control a 3D game engine projection mapped onto a 24 by 12 foot sentient pod. Players spatially trigger real-time story content consisting of data visualization, surveillance cameras, systems communication, embedded clues and puzzles, and embodied social interactions. They are essentially tasked with interpreting the flows of nonlinear information via hip-hop lyrics to make sense of the narrative in order to act collectively to transform the framework of the AI system, which is a metaphor for systems of oppression. So it's kind of like a sci-fi futuristic thing. As the work travels, the performance pod that you saw here also functions as an interactive installation and community space where participants contribute their own stories, which become memory maps that get integrated into the show. It also allows communities to talk about AI and a whole host of conversations that affect their communities directly. So yeah, so that's that piece. Hopefully I'm still keeping folks' attention. It's hard to tell. So I soon realized that at the root of the social justice issues I was working on, and many of us in the field, was epigenetic trauma. And Tina, oddly enough, also talked about this. It's funny, it's the first time I've actually seen Tina's work, and we were hired together, so it sounds like we should probably work together at some point. I soon realized that I was working on was epigenetic trauma, and that our bodies are actually archives of story. So Walking Wounded served as both a living lab and a multimedia performance, transforming trauma through movement, sound, and imagery, once again generated from the performer's autonomic and somatic nervous system. It sought to give expression to unspeakable personal and collective experiences of trauma, transforming unbearable pain and toxic shame through bioadaptive play. The piece explored the interplay between ghost stories and ritual, to bring audiences on a cross-cultural journey through a subterranean underground where participants collectively exercise ghosts, or what I was seeing as signifiers of trauma, using biotechnology to redefine performance and narrative architecture. It sought to restore nonverbal interpersonal connection in a safe environment, foster resilient communities, and bring movement into movement building through a 4-part co-design process, culminating in a nonlinear micro performance. So each dancer wears accents again. The biophysical and motion data stemming from the accents again was sent over open sound protocol. But this time it was interfaced with open frameworks to create these in a machine learning database to create these live drawings, right, based on people's movement patterns. It determined the musical and spatial parameters in Maximus P. So essentially the gestures were controlling the sound, but also doing these live drawings. So it enabled the performers to co-create live drawings through their unique gesture vocabulary, as well as generative musical composition based on solfeggio frequencies to quiet the parasympathetic nervous system. The gesture vocabulary based on, and I have an image later. I'd love to show you the Max patch because it's based on this system called the 9-gem system. So we were able to kind of map different emotional states to different movement patterns and sound frequencies. The gesture vocabulary was based on a movement generated in workshops and then mapped to a library of generative shaders, brushes, and images associated with fragmented narratives that emerged in that process. There were also storied objects made with custom electronics and 3D prints, which audience members could pick up during the performance that held lyrical fragments of memory shared by survivors that trigger, creating a polyphony of voices. As dancers and audience members interact with them during the performance, it added a layer of emergence and fragmentation. So I wish I had put I'll show it to you later. I have some extra stuff, just to look at some of the open source hardware that's built for the projects if people are interested and we have time. So last fall, I guess I'm going to share a couple more projects and then we'll see where we're at in time. And maybe I can share a little research that informs some of the projects. Last fall, I premiered a new work at New York Live Arts called Lizardly. And Lizardly it's a live mixed reality play that I co-created with Kat Mustazia that explores AI, environmental collapse, and interspeciality. Essentially, it's based on these two characters, Vincent and Rebecca, and their marriage is falling apart as they brace for an oncoming hurricane. And at the same time, they're simultaneously turning into lizards. So it's set in a post-Anthropocene Miami, and humans haven't been wiped out so much as they have to adapt to this rapid environmental shifts. Especially, one of the reasons is all of these kind of fiber optic cables under the ocean. So we have this whole backstory. And so they're basically like mutating into reptiles so that they can adapt, right? All of us humans soon, especially here in Florida, we're going to have to start adapting. And so basically the two of them are kind of like weathering the storm inside their smart home, and which is a technological remnant named June. So in the process of working on the play, we ended up having to create a third character, and you'll see her in a moment, who basically wears a VR headset and projection maps everything. But basically the two characters kind of are weaponizing June. She's kind of functioning and malfunctioning, and they use her to, justify their, domestic turf war, essentially. So here's a little bit here. The staging interfaces, and this is June's character. Here's her VR headset, and I did not like this costume and didn't pick it myself. You have to, when you're working on collaborations, you have to make compromises. But she's wearing a VR headset, and you'll understand why in a moment. So the staging interface is VR real-time motion capture, whereby I retarget the performer's body to these kind of 3D avatars of lizards, and machine learning, which we use InteractML, and I'll explain how we use that as we interfaced it with Unity, to create a vivid portrayal of hybrid humans in a post-human world. As a way of bringing the metaphor of transformation outward, June, as I mentioned, she's like this antiquated and repurposed smart home. What she's doing is she's actually influencing all the characters in the environment through her gestures. She's wearing Mimu gloves with flex sensors to control not only the environment inside Unity, the lights and sounds and animations, like all of these little creatures, but also the lights and the sounds and the theatrical environment. So there's a whole backstory of that I don't want to get into in terms of like what we discover about June at the end of the narrative. But I'm going to advance a little bit here so you can kind of see the lizards as they come in. So one of the things with the Rococo suits is that they need to be recalibrated. The old ones, the new ones are better. They had to be recalibrated, right? So we built in this purple heat lamp for the lizard so that they could be recalibrated periodically, as we had so much drift under the grid in New York City. So yeah, so essentially we're just kind of doing like real-time retargeting of their data to these kind of 3D avatars, these lizards. We could do this in a much more sophisticated way now, I teach a class called Motion Capture and Mixed Reality, and we've been creating all sorts of fun and crazy stuff. So yeah, so that's that piece. Hopefully you got a kick out of it. So yeah, and so for the past 4 years, I've been collaborating on Theater of the Mind, which is an immersive journey in a 15,000 square foot installation environment, exploring how our minds see and create the worlds around us. As participants traverse unique environments and try on a set of sensory experiments. The production was co-created by David Byrne and Mala Guankar, and it was commissioned by the Denver Center for the Performing Arts. Essentially, it's a story of a life lived backwards, like essentially like many Davids pop out of a coffin and say, "Hi, I'm David, and I'm dead." And then we travel backwards, like retrogressively, like a Gertrude Stein novel. And it, poses questions about our memory, identity, and perceptual reality. Essentially, you're taken on a journey with one guide and 16 other participants. Maybe you've seen Sleep No More or something like this, where you travel together with groups. I was essentially like responsible for developing the technology that supports the show, including the live stream networked VR. You saw a little bit here. This was an old version of it, but you're essentially turned into at the end of the show, and maybe this is a spoiler alert. Hopefully my contract won't get me into trouble, but you're turned into the size of a small child. You enter the body of a small child through the VR experience. And we had to like network 16 computers for all of the participants underneath the floorboards of this attic. So in my role, I basically ensured that the sets, lights, sounds, and physical objects demonstrating all the science worked. And then, for instance, up in red here, that's called the rhodopsin experiment. And, we're essentially using photoblast lights at specific time rates to generate ghostly images in the participants' retina. So what we're trying to do really is to take all of these kind of neurobiological or neuroscience experiments and render them accessible to lay people, but in this kind of like playful, this delightful way. But the reason I incorporated it here is because for the show, I also had to build this crazy, never seen before custom automated show control system using Python and to trigger all of the environmental cues, and architected this massive network infrastructure to run it using 20 Raspberry Pis, 10 iPads, a mile of cable throughout the whole space. And it was really an exercise of figuring out, what new machine learning tools can we use and supplement with kind of pre-existing technology to build something, because this type of show has never been done before. And we had essentially 7 audiences going through the show at any given moment. So we had to automate literally everything and build a ton of custom things in Touch Designer. And yeah, it was complex. So this is just giving you a little behind the scenes peek. This was an experiment called change blindness. So I'll show you a little bit of what it looked like inside. There's not much to see because I'm not allowed to show a lot of the footage. Oh, let me take maybe you can't hear the sound, which is good. Right? Can you not?
There's no sound. No sound. So you wanted us to hear or not to hear?
Oh, it's okay. It's a new David Byrne song, but I don't know if you want to hear a David Byrne song.
Yeah,
of course. I was just more going to show you what it looked like inside. So I'm just going to show it to you, and then I'm going to move on to the last show I'd like to talk about.
You may have to share again with sharing your sound. If you stop sharing and then share again.
I think that's why I'm going to skip it, the sound. We're just going to look at the inside so you can kind of see the walkthrough of what it looks like, and then I'll move on. Is that okay?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I guess that wasn't a very good preview, I guess. There's many other rooms. But what I want you to see is like each of those rooms, basically I've hidden all of these environmental sensors all around the space so that the actors, when they're interacting with different objects in the space, it turns stuff on and triggers stuff. And yeah, so it's a responsive environment, I guess, is a way to put it. Cool. So how am I doing on time, Carla? I'm good. Okay, awesome. So yeah, so I guess in addition, I guess I'll say, so there's one other big AI show that I'm doing now that I want to share out about. But I also want to share a few other things where, I curate other people's work just to tie the thematics around AI together. So in addition to these kind of like large scale network dance and theater shows that, that are my own work or that I collaborate on with other artists, I also started to co-curate Edgecut, again, also with Kat Mustasia, which is a live performance series. And in that, what we're trying to do is to explore our complex relationship to the digital. So we look at the many ways in which interactivity, games, robotics, wearables, AI, and other digital technologies can inform new practices in live performance. So they're usually like very rough R&D works, and it's just kind of like a salon environment where people are like sharing process, a little bit like this, where we've been very granular about like our processes. But during COVID, I'll just show a little bit of that. We had to move from the new museum in New York to Nowhere, which is like a 3D platform, and it became like a huge feat. But I guess what you're seeing here is, a lot of the work is like, pre-DALL-E, mid-journey. We're showing work that was around machine learning. We're also showing a lot of people creating their own custom instruments and then using generative audio, like this crazy one here, where this woman from Denmark, puts all these crazy tubes together and she's creating all these generative audio sounds using algorithms. So we're mostly interested in people who are experimenting with new modalities of expression and trying to think about what are these not only the new tools we're using, but what are hybrid practices as we start to move into COVID, and what does that mean about the body, all of this stuff. So essentially, it was kind of like an intimate salon style, and we would feature 4 performances using emerging tech to expand this language of performance and recenter liveness of the body. And the emphasis was really on fostering dialogue, similar to this, about tools and techniques employed. And so, yeah, so I think, out of that, what was very interesting is, during COVID, it would take me, we used Nowhere, which is this 3D environment. So we had like the 3D environment in itself, like this metaverse environment. And then we had all of these other kind of emerging tools where people are trying to send data over, telematically across multiple spaces. I had to basically run the show on like 7 computers, like in my mom's house in Maine. So during COVID, so, there's just like a lot learned, and it helped me to start thinking about like, where are we going as we reemerge from this? What does hybridity mean? What are some new tools that might have been created open source out of this process? What can be shared in terms of practices? So, yeah. So, during COVID, I also started incubating the Embodied Intelligence Shared Future with Sydney Skybetter and Melissa Painter. And together we cultivate a brigade of movers, inventors, world builders, and game designers in an attempt to reawaken our collective sense of embodiment. And we were responding during the time to the fact that our bodies carry intergenerational trauma, that they're surveyed and controlled and spun out of control by our dependence upon technology, right? And then it was amplified, I think, during COVID, as we all know and experienced. In response, we wanted to create a body-first frameworks at scale to help people re-engage with their bodies through games and open source tools, community building, and public awareness campaigns. So this is we did this massive billboard campaign to prepare people to kind of like re-enter into this altered world. And some of them are, your body is not obsolete. There was all of these different phrases. So during July, 2 Julys ago, or last July, Our interdisciplinary collective was commissioned by the Music Center in Los Angeles to host Run, Skip, and Play, which was a weekend-long kind of game jam hackathon to deploy a combination of high-tech artificial intelligence and augmented reality, and then low-tech chalk to reawaken our collective sense of embodiment. As I said, that was redundant. The result was a public beta test where participants re-engage with their bodies using movement and joy to exercise trauma and create community connection through collaborative problem solving. We essentially invited, I'll just show you what it looked like a bit. We invited like 100 Los Angelinos to co-create a new choreographic gameplay experience, a playful happening made up of bodies, chalk marks, mobile devices. And then we use collaboratively generated movement technologies to co-create with a bunch of different artists. And then players would cooperate non-linguistically with both human and non-human systems by moving together to catalyze change and foster collective healing. So for the piece, we developed these, dance games and a set of instructions and these chalk drawings and stuff. And then we used also the chalk drawings as like AR markers that people could like end up taking home with them from their experience of their own bodies in space being tracked and then overlaid. And then the coolest thing I think that we built was this OSC, Open Sound Control Bridge, which allowed us to receive and transmit aggregate data from 100 participants' phones. And then from that data, out in public space, we developed a spatialized sound system that was responsive to this data, and then also generative visuals that were responding to the participants' phone data. And then I was basically conducting the whole thing. Underground, they have a whole control system where I could send cues to trigger the fountain and also change all the video. So I was like firing all of these commands. It was like a whole crazy thing. So what it ended up being is this like performance with 100 people to generate real-time music as they were moving spatially around, as well as generative visuals. So it was very cool. So we had, some PTZ cameras that were also motion tracking everything. It was very cool. So I'm hoping other people might use this bridge that we built for their own projects. It's on Git and stuff like other projects. So this is the last work I'm going to share. Most recently, and this starts to introduce a little bit of my research, because this particular piece called Bioadapted was it's considered like a reenactment. This is how we're framing it, a reenactment investigative documentary, that it's a play, with actors portraying real people and scientists, of which I was one, paired with humorous and eerie fictional pieces about what our future might look like if AI propagates in unethical ways that don't serve humankind. So the work was actually inspired by my research and the tools I built for the Limbic Lab, which I hope I can share a little bit of if we have time, which appears in the calibration scene, which I'll show you in a moment. But I also served as the technology and innovation director. So again, I designed and developed a different OSC bridge to send data from a brain-computer interface like EEG headset to control a haptic vest, and then light patterns that were sewn onto the costume to trigger the choreography in the performer. And then I also built this custom-made avatar using facial recognition and Unreal, so that during the grand finale, the audience basically puts ChatGPT on trial, and you can interrogate it real time while it puppets back to you. And what we ended up doing is using this chair to projection map the face of the avatar onto the chair and then respond real time to the audience's questions. The goal of the work is really to investigate, interrogate, and educate, all while delivering this kind of like unique interactive science enhanced experience using technology. So after each performance, we host conversations that look prismatically at the hopes and fears that audiences have in their respective communities around AI. So again, this is sort of like part of my research, which I'm not going to talk about, is this kind of like media literacy piece. And in particular, a lot of it is focused now around like AI and, the communities that are most deeply impacted by AI. So let me see if I can share a little bit about this. You won't be able to hear the words, but So this is kind of based on my media genome research, but I was going to show you here. So the character walks up, she gets in the chair, and this is a little bit of like my lab stuff here. This is from a project that I did with Define American, which is an immigrant rights organization in the United States. But we decided to kind of incorporate it into this kind of like fictional representation of my lab in a very meta way. So essentially we're in the future, and this character here is getting calibrated for, well, it's a lot, I kind of complicated to explain, but I have this whole concept, and part of what my lab does is like we're creating this concept called biomedia, where we're bioadapting content real time on the fly, which I'll explain in a moment, but this is what's being represented here. So this character comes in, her whole body biometrics are being calibrated, so that then in the future, we have the scenario where this company bioadapts content real time to create kind of personalized media based on our DNA. So partially fictionalized future, but it's also research that I'm doing and like tools that I'm building. So yeah, so there's that. And then the other thing, so then we have a little scene here where she's bioadapting this funny little Arctic scene with all of her bio data that's now been like calibrated. So yeah. Anyway, kind of silly. But yeah, so then all these crazy things start to happen. The environment, there's a fire, and then there's a massive storm, and it just gets more and more chaotic. And then we have a coded bias scene. So we talk a little bit about that. This is the actual panel. This character is playing me in the middle there, which is very weird to experience in the theater, somebody using your own words. And then I just want to show you kind of what the avatar looks like here at the end for the ChatGPT pod. Yeah, so then it looks very creepy. So this is basically like the audience asking ChatGPT questions. And then she responds. I mean, we're using all sorts of stuff on the back end, actually generating the content through ChatGPT, like the responses. And, you know, the goal originally was to build a tool that could listen to the audience's response and then real-time respond. But what we discovered, because the audience was so far away and it was muffled, it was actually hard to get, you know, accurate, however accurate ChatGPT is responses. So, but what's happening here is there's actually an actor up behind stage that's puppeting like real-time the facial expressions and the vocalizations. So, but in the next iteration, I think we're gonna, you know, add more kind of automation to it. So, yeah, so that's that. Carla, I don't know what we have for time. Like, I'm not really sure because everything's been so out of skew today. So shall I talk a little bit about the research, or would you like to move to a discussion?
This depends on you the most. You want to show us more, and then we go for a discussion. The plan is to have an award ceremony that will last 5 minutes, and then after that we're done. But then if you want to go for a discussion, then it's up for you. Like this whole symposium is for the speaker. So if you want to show something, or we can just
I guess
break.
I'm just wondering, since I can't feel the audience, and I'm actually a very embodied person generally.
We can take you around with the camera.
To what's going on?
Everybody will come here and say hi, Heidi.
I guess maybe one of the things, I won't share the open source tools per se unless people are interested, but maybe I'll just walk you through what the lab does so you can understand the connection to the play, and then also you can understand all the other, you know, like specifically like how I'm using biometrics in AI, and it shouldn't take more than, I think, 5 or 10 minutes, and then we would still have a little bit of time. But you let me know, maybe if people want to like shake their hands, yeah, go for it, or if like you're like, oh, I already have a question. Okay, cool. All right, so yeah, so as I said, and I already mentioned this earlier because I wasn't sure I was going to get to it. So, you know, part of that kind of 4-part process, that pillar system, is like research. And in fact, I'm setting up an embodied intelligence lab here, which was supposed to be part of like our AI and art center, and our certificate program that we're developing. And so much of this research is going to start moving inside the Institute and also expanding out into dance and theater. But right now, that's not the focus of the research, but it will help you understand the connection, I hope. So as I mentioned, like the research, basically I'm doing like media effects research. I'm not sure if people are familiar with that. It's like, you know, audience research and understanding how media and technology like affect us on a neurobiological level. And I build a lot of open source tools. And in fact, we'll be putting up a website very soon. I mean, we're in the process of developing it, where you can download each tool as like an extractable thing individually, or you can have the whole suite that I'm using. So I use, surveys and story coding, and I use biometrics and linguistic analysis. And really the goal of the research is to work with social justice organizations, media makers, artists who want to create more impactful media. And so, central to the lab, the Limbic Lab, what it's really doing is isolating the narrative ingredients that move us to act was the initial premise for starting it, right? We have Nielsen Neuro and a whole bunch of research institutions that are black box, hard coded, and that organizations don't have access to. So my goal is to make an open source version. So what it consists of is these kind of two components, a narrative engine and a media machine. So the narrative engine basically takes in and it syncs real-time data from brainwaves, biophysical data like heart rate, blood flow, body temperature, muscle contraction, like the sensors that I built for the dance piece, plus others, as well as eye tracking and facial recognition, while a subject is viewing or interacting with different types of media content. And data, but I don't capture everything. I just capture data at kind of key places in the time code where critical plot points or character interaction or unusual camera angles occur. And this is based on predetermined story coding sheets. So for each genre, so I'm looking at like games, episodic television, webisodes, podcasts, like a whole bunch of different things. And we create an individual coding sheet for those genres with a lot of different variables. And then the key components that I select from there are the ways I isolate the arousal and valence patterns of the data. And then the survey data basically consists of people's political beliefs along with their psychographic and demographic profiles. And I use that, and also like media consumption habits, right? So I use that and I integrate that into my system essentially to get a deeper understanding of like the individual in terms of their preferences, their ideological preferences, their viewing patterns, and these types of things. And then the media machine part then uses predictive models and machine learning to automate the production processes. This is like the goal. This is like what we're in the process of doing, which ties into the theater piece, right? Where they're saying this is kind of like something fictional in the future, but I'm actually developing it right now. And so what I'm trying to do essentially is like the more immediate imprints that go into this database across the different media I mentioned, the more nuanced these kind of predictive models become, right? So this is kind of like an image of like the back end, just using Neo4j. And we have all these different variables. So I'm taking data in from a whole bunch of different things prismatically. So I'm taking all the survey data. I'm also taking in the linguistic analysis data. So we're basically like deconstructing scripts. We have built a tool which you're going to be able to use. You can just upload this, whatever it is. It could be a film script, it could be a game script, it could be a song, whatever it is. And it ingests the script and then it deconstructs it into various things like power words and different parts that map to the time code as well, of each of the content types. And then, yeah, so this is just kind of like a backend. This is not the data visualization. This is kind of just where we're storing everything. And then it also takes in all the biometric data that is mapped to the time code as well. Okay, so we have multiple types of data, and it's just like all unstructured, and it's being thrown into this database, and then we're correlating things, different variables against one another. But what I want to say is during COVID, I had to start pivoting away from like in-person field studies. So usually we would work with social justice organizations or media makers and things, and we would like set up pilot studies in different cities relative to where they wanted to work with those demographics, but I couldn't do them anymore. So we started building out these remote studies using just like facial expression and eye tracking mostly, using webcam. And now there's a lot more that we have to do post-processing wise to annotate the data. So before we export it so that we can map the data in the database, we have to annotate all of the things based on the story coding sheet. But the goal of the research really for me is to find out, what combination of these narrative ingredients are the most appealing and galvanizing to specific intended audiences to enable like our own creative work, but also the field, right? What I was calling like culture change workers or other media makers to create more effective media. And so I guess maybe I can show you a few. These are just some of the findings here of a study that I did with the Norman Lear Center, kind of combining social science research with kind of this more biometric approach. And I'm happy to share the study if folks want to read it. But there are just some, pretty interesting things that we uncovered. And then I guess, lastly, I guess the only thing that I'd say is that, all the things that I've been building, even the stuff for the creative work is, all open source for the field, for artists, for researchers, policymakers, whatever. And we like to make both the instruments, but also the methodology and the scientific protocols open source. So this could include, this is like the scene by scene story coding and survey instruments that become the variables that then we're correlating. And this one is just for episodic TV, but as I mentioned, we have a whole host of other ones: video games, podcasts, explainer videos, music videos. But this could also be, this is the Python script that we use for the linguistic analysis, this NLP tool that we build. And what you see here is we have like sentiment analysis, and then we also have social issues. But if we went back to the story coding sheet, we also are mapping it back, the sentiment analysis that is being experienced by viewers, and then the social mentions that are in each of those pieces. So there's a lot of different things that overlap here. And then the other thing, it also includes, like this is the Xsense here. This is the second iteration that we made available to others, not just to our own work. And this is a biophysical sensor, and it, I was using it creatively, but I also realized I could bring it into the lab and use it for measurement, and not just creative expression. So yeah, and then this is just, I think Tina was also mentioning PD earlier. This is how we were doing our feature extraction, but then started to build out an application in C so that other people could build their own extractable applications on top of this here. And it uses an MMG sensor and a whole host of muscle contraction release, plus a whole host of other measures. And then lastly, this is visually not what we're going for at all, but to give you a sense, so there's the database, which is the back end. I basically have 37 different issue areas that we've captured through survey analyses and different, top, in 50 case studies in terms of different genres and content. And so what we're trying to do now is not give people, access. They will have access if they want to use the database and they know Cypher and they can run their own queries. And we're going to have some sample queries available. But right now what we're building is a front end that would allow people, lay people, to just create their own correlation mapping by using kind of these different filters on like the demographic and media consumption habits. And then you would search by media type, and then it would show the different shows that we have in here. And then you would also see an overlay of all of the biometric data based on time code mapped to the different shows that it was correlating. And then what we want to do, and this isn't quite the layout, is that we want to be able to create real-time data visualizations so that people can export those or do whatever they want with them. So we're still in the process of designing the infrastructure, but we're building the front piece out in React.js right now. So yeah, and this was the 9-gem system that I want to show you that Kevin Patton and I put together for the Walking Wounded. So Walking Wounded was a dance piece, but we actually did multimodal movement workshops with different communities that were affected. And then we brought the sensors and then this software, this instrument, essentially into workshop spaces so that it enabled people to start moving differently. So part of my theory around trauma is that, we have these deeply embedded scripts in our nervous system, and that most of people who are deeply affected by trauma have very limited gesture vocabulary. We all do to some extent. We are very habituated. So my belief is if we can expand our gesture vocabulary, that we can dislodge these deeply embedded scripts in the nervous system. And so the idea here was to kind of map these kind of emotional qualities to gesture vocabulary and to kind of tie together this kind of machine learning database of gestures with this kind of sonic representation from the sensors, and then like generative visuals, so that there was biofeedback for the participants in the workshops. So, and then this is just a little, I don't know if there's a video here or not, I don't remember. Yeah, so this is just how we set up the Mimu gloves, and using InteractML, which is a program, I don't know if folks are interested in, it's a machine learning program. It actually works better with Unreal, but a friend of mine from Goldsmiths, Phoenix Perry, built it with some colleagues there. And it's a machine learning system that does all of the training to then like automate a lot of interactions within your game engine. So I use it to teach as well. Yeah, so I guess that's it. Hopefully, yeah, I kept to the 10 minutes. So I hope folks still have a little bit of juice or energy to ask some questions.
We have questions.
Do we have questions?
I have questions. So Heidi, no, it's fine. I'm here. Thank you so much. I really appreciate and love the subversive nature of your work. And it really made me think, like, I do know stuff about cybernetics, but the way how you exposed it, it's really, really eerie. And then I have kind of always find myself oscillating then between two perspectives, where one is a little bit negative and dark, and one is a little bit positive. And so I don't know. Then I have to ask two questions, one from a more negative perspective and one from more positive. So on the negative side, I was listening to Yanis Varoufakis, who was Minister of Finance of Greece, who is now saying that we left capitalism and we went into some kind of digital feudalism, where like Amazon and Meta, they're basically just feuds, and they're basically, the other capitalists are paying them rent, sometimes even 40% of their earnings, just to be on their platform. And basically he says this is no longer capitalism. And what is fascinating about Amazon and about Meta or Facebook is that, like, companies like Siemens or Ford, they spend around 80% of their profit on paying salaries, while Meta and Amazon spend less than 1% on their salaries.
Wow.
So therefore, social networks are obviously then going to be pushed as something very significant, because there is a lot of interest for this profit to be going to very few hands. Therefore, social networks in that regard should be like very much the things for us to be pushed into our eyes. And then the premise somehow of social networks is that embodied or disembodied communication and connectedness essentially is the same thing. But when I was teaching any course over Zoom, I very quickly realized that they are not the same at all, and that embodiment, is completely a different game. And then, your works make it clear that they are very different. And what I see as a prevalent strategy today is to somehow even go to try to hack or re-engineer human beings, or give them medicine for this disembodiment to work. So my question is, like, why are we so afraid of the body? Like, is this really a cultural or political project, or is a project of this new feudal digital feudalism? But then on this, so this is the question for you from the dark side. And now one from the light side is, I also like Bernard Stiegler, who is a French philosopher who developed a concept of pharmacon. And he says basically pharmacon is when, since we are technological beings, when we invent a new technology, it starts gradually kind of making us sick. But then in the future, this very same technology, when used subversively, starts healing us. So then I see also some remnants of your work in that perspective, because you are trying to repair things with the exactly same technology that is used against us. So do you kind of feel that there's some connection to what you're doing?
Yeah, I feel like you have a whole thesis here. So I think the dark side and the non-dark side, I guess you have like, what is this thing? Like, what is this fear of the body? Like, why did we have to reject the body? I guess that's in part what I was trying to map out. I mean, like, one could say even like Norbert Wiener, right, was bipolar. I don't know how many of you know this at all, if this is new information or not. And part of why he was invested in creating kind of computational solutions to all of our societal problems was at first because he was trying to regulate his own emotions. He wanted to create a computational system to regulate his own emotions, right? Because he feared these unconscious responses in his body. So, I mean, there's that thought. I mean, like I think about Norbert Wiener and I think about how strongly he kind of shaped cybernetics and how cybernetics is still baked, the ethics of cybernetics, right? What I call cybernetic ethics, which is based on quantification, prediction, and social control, is baked into every technology we use today. We just, have forgotten to think about it, right? And so I think part of what I premised and when I set up the cybernetics thing is that there was this kind of forking moment, right, post World War II, and that World War II in terms of the fear of the body, the fear of the other, all of those things, and even how like we need to numb to like defend against like emotions and different things. There is this kind of fear, this anxiety about the body, right? And then you even go and look at the 1950s. There's in terms of we can look to science fiction where there's all these kind of bodily fears that are played out in these anxieties that are they take alternate forms, right? Not the human form. So I'm not sure, like the root. I mean, we could go all the way back to religion and all sorts of places here to shame. Like, so my belief, like, part of my premise is that most human behavior stems from shame. And what do we fear most? Like, what is at the root of shame, right? Our kind of like fear of belonging or the loss of belonging. And we believe that, the body in its unpredictability is at the root of that, right? And so we've created all computational systems, my belief here, to essentially eradicate human error. And that error has to do with emotions, and it has to do with the body and all the messy stuff we don't want to deal with. There was a whole other potential. There was one character in this Macy conference that was really interested in subjectivity, and all his ideas got thrown out. But I don't know. That's just sort of a theory I have, I guess. And then the making us sick part, I'm so happy you brought that up or you caught the thread, because there's a whole bunch of work I actually didn't share at all. And, part of the thread for me, my dissertation looked at the social, cultural, and neurobiological effects of intelligent technology, and looking at it premised this idea, that the body and our reconnecting with one another, our relational reciprocity with one another, with the natural world is kind of like our antidote here. And for me to be able to write that, I literally had to go off the grid for an entire year because I lacked the capacity for sustained thought. And part of what we're seeing, now is like finally the social dilemma, people have caught up. Like I was writing and thinking about this back in, like 2013. And now we're starting to realize, the ramifications that it's having on, young kids and all of the various ways that our societal fabric is breaking down. We have probably the largest epidemic in this country is teen suicide. It's not only teen suicides, it's tween suicides, right? And there's a direct correlation between like social media consumption habits, right? And so part of the work that I didn't mention, which I usually kind of do a full loop on, is that I've been working with New York Times journalist Julie Skelfo, and we started something called Get Media Savvy, which has now moved to Moms Against Media Addiction, which is something that she's decided to bring forward. But it was really about like, how do we educate people, give them simple tools, right, to take back control of their hijacked affective and cognitive faculties. Like, and mostly what we discovered that people who wanted this information, why it was pivoted, is because parents just don't know, right? They don't understand how all of these technologies are affecting their children. They see the behavioral challenges, teachers see it, but they don't know what to do. They don't understand the strategy. So the idea was to try to kind of build, a podcast series, like a whole multimedia engagement campaign from like my social justice side. That would be something on the scale of the American Way campaign, right? Which was also a post-World War II campaign, which allowed us to essentially use all the tools at our disposal, right? Multimedia touch points, going to Hollywood, all of the different potential partners and collaborators to build an awareness campaign, but just with media through narrative strategy to get people to become aware of these kind of deleterious effects. And then, yeah, in terms of like the healing us, I mean, it's one of the things I said at the end of my TED talk was, like, can we use the same tools like that are creating toxic media, right? We're in this toxic media landscape. Can we use them to create instead narrative medicine, right? Can we use this, empty out the negative values of media and technology, and reinfuse positive, which sounds very simplistic. But like, what would that look like? And how can we do that? How can we use technologies to bring us together? So I don't know if that made any sense. I think I still have COVID brain, but hopefully 2 more days to quarantine.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, it's pretty late now, so I'm also, I don't have COVID brain, but I have midnight brain. So I apologize in advance. I'm super fascinated by the work and the kind of complex plays that you play, and the amount of technology that is there, but is not somehow justifying the kind of spectacles that are unfolding. I'm just super fascinated by it. But then I have a question regarding, so for example, this particular instance in LA where the people start dancing and then they have a kind of connectivity between them, etc. It's translated into music. So I'm curious about the difference of being of liberating body versus being liberated from the body.
Yeah.
And then this kind of directly goes into all these experiments that you're doing with the genome, etc., as well, because it seems like so the question is more along the lines of liberating from nature, right? So liberating from the body, and then once we kind of trace it back to the very essence of our natures, so when we involve the DNA, when we involve the genome, doesn't it become kind of an ultra encapsulation of our very nature, So I'm just curious about that. How do we discuss the liberation from our bodies if what we are doing is running circles and then going back to the very thing that defines us as what we are?
Yeah,
I don't know if it's any clearer.
No, it's an interesting tautological argument. I guess I'm wondering why you feel the need to be liberated from the body.
No, I'm curious about liberating from nature. So that's my kind of only mission.
Like the natural world, or what nature?
Yeah. So yeah,
I feel like, I guess
are all part of nature, and whatever we do cannot possibly not be natural. So I think about it in that way. But then nature as a construct, as placed within the contemporary milieu, let's say.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like for me, I mean, I don't know if it's also, my dad is part Micmac, and like I think about our relational reciprocity with the natural world. Like I feel like one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is like this potential concept of like trisociation, which is like, how do we create non-hierarchical relationships between like nature, the human body, and the natural world? What would that actually look like? Right. And so I don't know how if I could speak to this need to extract ourselves from the body, from nature, because I feel like we need to become more intertwined and to understand and learn from the natural world. So I don't know if you're familiar with the book Braiding Sweetgrass. It was all the rage a while back. So I'm very fond of that book. It felt a little bit like a transitional object for a while. So I think there's a lot of thoughtful interrogation and reflection in that book about what a possible future with our natural environment could be. But I think maybe what you're getting at, and maybe that's this kind of, we're in this climate crisis, at the moment, and there's a lot of fear and uncertainty, and there's this need to kind of escape that crisis or solve that crisis or use technology to fix that crisis and all of those things. And I just go back, I remember seeing this film, I don't know, it was Wim Wenders, or there was some German director, where it was a whole film about man and machines. It was like how human man-made machines could change natural landscapes. And in the center of the movie is one character, the only female character in the entire documentary. And she's situated in the middle of the movie at this kind of natural history museum. And she's sharing how, you know, we're at the end of the Anthropocene, right? This is where we are. And that, you know, nature is going to live on and regenerate itself, but we're not. And so I think, I don't know if that's where your question is coming from at all, but I think, you know, I'm interested in like a deeper entwinement, I guess, or entanglement with the natural world. Yeah. So.
Yeah, no, that's you have answered it perfectly. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, absolutely.
cool. I know it's late. So are you all going to have dinner together or something?
Yes, you can join. Come with masks if you really want.
Ah.
You're here. She's just right here. Come with a mask. We're going to be outside. Anyway, if you want. Yeah, so I would like to thank Heidi for the time, the patience, and all of you for tonight. And I will just require an applause.